tell me when the recording.
Okay, you can start.
Okay, super. Yeah, here it is. Okay, I'm very happy today to present you Corinne, Jola, and Bertha Bermudez, who have characterized their profession as interdisciplinary, building step by step and in different ways a dialogue between performing arts and specifically dance and scientific research. Corinne Jola is a senior lecturer at Albertay University. Her research merges cognitive neuroscience with performing arts, and she is one of the founders of modern empirical psychological research in dance, with over 15 years of experience in this field. She holds a PhD in cognitive neuroscience and also a master's degree in psychology. She also a trained and practicing choreographer. She holds a master's degree with distinction in choreography from Laban Trinity Conservatoire of Music and Dance and a postgraduate degree in dance culture from the University of Bern. Her studies are motivated by the belief that studying cognitive and neuronal responses in relation to performing arts can provide us with extraordinary insights into human brain, human behavior, with a huge impact. She's indeed also interested in how dance can help improving health and well-being of people. She has been publishing a lot of studies in peer-reviewed journals and book chapters. She also bases her research on embodied practices. For more information, I suggest you to visit her website, www.cocodance.com. There you can see how many practical and theoretical projects she developed around the concept of presence, dancer-audience interaction, defining her field as embodied neuroscience. Before the position at Albertay University, she held a postdoctoral research position at University of Glasgow, University of Surrey, and at INSERM in Paris. And she collaborated with internationally acclaimed dance and theater companies. Bertha Bermudez is a dancer, researcher, and interactive artist. With a degree in dance and choreography, she has been part of prominent leading European dance companies and has worked with renowned choreographers such as Maurice Béjart, William Forsythe, Joad Narin, just to mention a few. As a freelancer, she has worked with Rui Horta and Paul Selving Norton, and she has also worked as a dancer, assistant, and researcher with the company Emio Greco at the ICK Amsterdam Choreographic Center based in Amsterdam. From 2005 until today, she has shifted into dance research, coordinating different research projects on dance notation and documentation. And she has been part of Artsy Group at Amsterdam Hogeschool voor de Kunst, dealing with artistic research. Since 2014, she has combined her PhD on performing archives with her work as an advisor, coordinator, tutor, and documentarist for various dance projects. And since 2020, she has created her own company, Creative Paths, to generate dance documents, formation, and research projects around dance transmission and creation. Thank you again for accepting our invitation. We look forward to listening to you. So the stage is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marta, for the kind introduction and invitation to present. And I'm going to start presenting. Bertha and I discussed a little bit what we are going to talk about together before today. And at first we talk a little bit about ourselves, where we come from, about our research, and then artistic practice as well, and ending kind of in questions that we had or have taken from there. And when I received the invitation to think of an artistic practitioner, I would like to invite as well to talk about the research and the artistic practice. I instantly thought of Bertha. We met many years ago. I think I was a replacement for a presentation at Cinedance in Amsterdam. And since then, I'm just always so fascinated of discussing different dance-related issues, notation, cognition, spatial awareness, breathing with Bertha and with the company she was with at the time. So thank you very much, Bertha.
Thank you.
Saying yes, always again and again when I ask you to share ideas and discuss things. That's great.
Well, thank you for thinking of me.
Always. As a title, I suggested 2020, Presence and Empathy in Performers and Spectators, very much influenced by the time when I was asked whether I would like to give the presentation, which was when we were in the middle of the pandemic and I was just teaching online non-stop. So I felt like there is something related to the research I'm doing of the experiences I had moving teaching from in-person teaching to teaching online, and how that actually can be combined and made a topic from that. So in February 2020, I was skiing, enjoyed the outdoors very much, and it was only a couple of weeks before the UK went into lockdown. So we kind of didn't know what was coming. There was some kind of anticipation also from what happened elsewhere, of course, but still we didn't quite know how life would look like and change. So all my teaching, as I already said, went online. I started doing yoga, dance classes online. I met friends and family online. So all my life, like many other people's life, just moved online. But what I didn't move online was going and seeing like performances. So a lot of dance companies made their performances available for free online, as well as there were some gallery online events where people could move around online in galleries, which I received the notifications for either of them. And I used to be a very active audience member in dance performances, but also I loved going to galleries and looking at art, especially contemporary art. But these two things were the things I actually didn't miss that much. And that's another point which I thought was quite interesting. Something that I felt defined who I am and my identity of spectating arts just wasn't there, and I didn't miss it as much. Yet what I missed a lot living on my own was just real person interaction. And I had a lot of online contact with people. I can just see Bertha laughing. But it just wasn't the same. And I quickly talked to my neighbors, of course, or people that I met on the streets, but there was very little interaction in real life to what I normally have. And as soon as when we were allowed to go out more and longer and further, I was just so happy to kind of see animals and interact with animals in real life. And I think that's the important thing here. There is something when we interact in real life with other people that gives us a feedback, not just a sense of presence of the other being, but also it reflects back to our own sense of being. And this is just something I'm very interested in, what this is. And it relates to some research that we've done way before the pandemic. Because with the pandemic, a lot of studies were conducted regarding this so-called Zoom fatigue. So when we listen to other people on online media, or when we have discussions on Zoom or Teams, that there is a time lag between the audio and the visual, and that makes us really tired. But I felt there's something else that is also missing online. And what is it? Even if we can keep the timing precisely the same of the audio and the visual information that we receive, there is a difference between how we engage observing somebody performing live to watching somebody performing on video. And here you can see these two pictures on the left from a study where we did test expert spectators who have no physical experience in the movements they watched when they watched solo performances of classical ballet dance, classical Indian dance, which was Bharatanatyam, and an acting control condition. And we also tested novices, so people who normally do not go and watch these kind of performances and who have not been trained in those kind of performances. Then the novice group, we wanted to invite back, so we tested. It was not the same group, it was a new novice group we invited into the lab to watch the same performances, but on a computer screen, and that you can see on the right-hand side. And this is how experiments just normally look like. It was rather unusual to actually take the technology into the rehearsal space of the Scottish Ballet and do the testing there. And we could only test 2 participants at a time, kind of with a shield in between them so that they wouldn't influence each other in how they would respond to the performance. TMS stands for transcranial magnetic stimulation, and probably many of you know what it is. And just very briefly, therefore, you have a magnetic pulse which you trigger outside the brain, but that induces an electric signal within the cortex. So if you hold this coil, which you can see me holding on the left, and trigger magnetic pulse, then that kind of evokes a motor evoked potential in the participants. If you hold it, like I do here with the circular coil, over an area where the hand and the arm is represented, that triggers a motor evoked potential in the arm and the hand. However, this potential is sub-threshold. So generally you wouldn't see even a little twitch from the outside, but you measure the responses and you amplify the signal. It works very similar to as when you decide to move your thumb or to grasp a cup and drink a sip of water. But there you do it voluntarily. With TMS, you trigger it externally. And of course, as I said before, the signal is much smaller, so you wouldn't be able to lift the cup by using TMS. But what we do with this is, for example, if you imagine doing a movement, or if you prepare to move your hand or your fingers, then your motor cortex is already excited. So if you apply from the outside a stimulus to a cortex that is already engaged in movement, then you would get a much stronger response measured through the electrodes and then amplify the signal, instead of when the brain is really not that much engaged in movement. And what we found here, comparing novices watching these performances live to novices watching it on video, is that there was a much stronger somatosensory engagement with the Indian dance when they watched it live compared to when they watched it on video. And that was in the arm muscle. So actually that particular difference didn't reach significance, but there was a strong trend. And this is something that we didn't see when we looked and compared it with the experts just in the live condition. But when we looked specifically at novices live compared to on video, then we noticed that difference. But what we also did is we didn't just measure the response of the brain or the corticospinal excitability, how it is called. We also asked participants how much they enjoyed the different performances, and we did that in both contexts. And what was noticeable here is really that when novices watched those different styles of performances on a computer screen, the enjoyment ratings were very different for each individual style. So ballet was liked most, for example. But when the novices watched it live, there was no difference in how much they enjoyed each style. So they enjoyed them similarly, let's put it that way. And that's really important, because when we do experiments, we really want any other measurement other than the one we are interested in to remain the same. And we know that enjoyment is very closely linked with the engagement and corticospinal excitability. So you would want that to be the same. Hence, testing live, considering these differences, was much better. But still, I mean, that doesn't say much about now what is the difference between live and on video. And there are several differences that you can already see on this example. Is live is bigger, computer screen is smaller, but we compared what the participants would see sitting closer to sitting further away. So it's kind of comparable. But there's something else that happens when we watch performances live. And because from the lab where you most of you presumably are situated. I kept it really short on talking about mirror neurons, because this study with the TMS goes back to the idea of mirror neurons. And mirror neurons are neurons that fire both when we execute an action as well as when we passively observe that action. And it's also based on the seminal brain imaging study by Beatriz Calvo-Merino in 2005, where they looked at expert performers in ballet and capoeira dancing, watching ballet and capoeira movements. And the network across the brain was stronger activated when experts watched the movements they had already physical expertise in, which led to the interpretation that mirror system integrates observed actions of others with an individual's personal motor repertoire, and suggests that the human brain understands actions by motor simulation. However, now I already talked about the study a little bit that in the timeline actually happened after this one. But you can ask yourself, considering what you've already heard and what I said here about the interpretation of the expert Dantzaz, our interest with the TMS was, what about audiences who have only visual experience? And what about live observation versus observation from video? These were kind of the questions we had before we did the experiments, but those questions still remain to some extent. And two of the issues I want to talk about in what is really the difference between live and on video or digital goes back to the work I did with Bertha and the company of Emilio Greco, Peter Scholten, whenever I had the opportunity to join them. And I really enjoyed as well physically joining the company, because it gives you an embodied understanding that is very different again from just watching it. And two of the issues I want to talk about is the breathing and the spatiality that seem important when doing the movements, when watching the company performing, but also in relation then to the research that I have been doing. And much of it is linked to a project I worked on with Glasgow University with Frank Pollack and Dee Reynolds and Matthew Reason, which was termed kinesthetic empathy. Kinesthetic empathy is the ability to experience empathy merely by observing the movements of another human being. And we could have already a discussion on what empathy is, and there are many different definitions of empathy. Just put that aside for now and focus more on the kinesthetic sense, what this really is, that is kind of that the audience can experience, and not always does, but some audience specifically go and watch dance to experience that kind of sensation, kinesthetic sensation. So the kinesthetic sense is similar to the proprioceptive sense, but it's more related to movement rather than the sense of position of your body limbs in space. So for example, if you watch somebody jump or fall on the street and you have like a sensational experience in your own body as if this would have happened to you, that's what I would describe as the kinesthetic sense, to keep it relatively simple here. So there are two elements that seem important. One is the audio stimulation, music or breathing. And I'm really interested in the breathing and breathing here now, talking so much. And the other one is the type of movement, whether it's a vertical movement observed or a horizontal movement observed. And it's not just that I'm really interested in the breathing, but when we worked in this interdisciplinary project on kinesthetic empathy, we had a lot of discussions in the team and with audience members, and we kind of observed that it's almost half the audience who really enjoys hearing the breathing of dancers when they perform, and half of the audience really did not like that. For them, it was too close. They wanted to just like step away and have a nice visual auditory experience. And what we just found fascinating is that it's really like almost a split between half and half. It's not that there's one audience who likes more this or so, but it's like this very clear split. So we did a study where Rosie Kay, a professional dancer who studied with the company in Amsterdam for some time and learned the movement materials. We used then the work with her and had her performing a sequence that she, I would say, recreated or newly created based on the physicality that she experienced with Emio. And that was 16 minutes, if I remember correctly, and she performed this as a whole piece with an intro and an ending. And once within that, it was with Bach classical music. Once it was with an electronic sound score, and once it was without music, but their briefing was amplified. So the audience, the live audience, in one context, could really hear the briefing. Here we did Fmi study where participants in the scanner only saw the section with the beginning and the end, if I remember correctly, but the section with the Bach music, the classical music, and the other section with the briefing only, because those two seemed, from the audience research that we did, the two most important distinctions. What is important here is that this was an intersubject correlation, and I want to briefly explain what this is, because it's been done quite often now, but it's still not as well known as contrast analysis in the scanner. It goes back to the study by Uri Hasson in 2004, when he had participants in the scanner watching a 20-minute excerpt from the film, Hollywood feature film, The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, in the scanner. So you can imagine as if audiences who sit in the cinema and watch a film, and then the researchers looked at where in the brain is each individual voxel activated or deactivated over the time that the participants watch the film. And you can see this in the figure on the right. And you can see there is kind of an average response across the 5 participants that the researchers tested in this occasion. And this is a stimulus-driven explorative methodological approach in its original source. Nowadays, it's used in many different ways, but the idea originally was you can show a stimulus and then observe how spectators respond, where they share the neuronal activity between them when they watch the same stimulus. So you didn't have to have any clear set out conditions in advance before you actually did the experiment. So that's what it means, stimulus driven. So here you can see on the left viewer 1 and viewer 2 and the same voxels, where is the activation increased and decreased. And then on the right, you can see this across the 5 participants in yellow, where in the brain is significantly more voxels activated at the same time in the same way across those 5 participants. And that's mostly in visual areas and audiovisual superior temporal cortex areas, as well as some parietal areas, which was quite interesting to see that this is actually possible at a time. So we used this inter-subject correlation approach for this study. What we found that when participants watched the Rosie Kay performance section with music, then we had more correlation across the participants in the superior temporal gyrus, more anterior than posterior. And this is a known area for complex audio processing. From the interviews that we conducted, because this was an interdisciplinary study, we knew that the audience gained pleasure through trying to bring the dance and the music together. And they were watching the live performance. They didn't quite know what the experiment was, but some of them remembered, well, but I think these are the same movements that we saw before, but now without music, but now with, and or is it really the same, or are they tricking us to think it is the same? So they were really interested in kind of combining them. When the audience in the scanner watched the performance section without music, then it's also the superior temporal gyrus, but more posterior. And this is more linked to areas of body processing. So bodily sounds like the breath provide a more salient auditory signal than music in primary auditory regions. What we also found is that without music, when the audience could hear the breathing, the intersubject correlation was increased in parietal and occipital cortices. So in a way, it had a greater influence of the body than when interpreting the dance stimuli with music. So the breathing likely enhanced the bodily engagement of the audience when they watched the performance. And this is the section about the breathing, and I'm just looking at the time. The other part I wanted to talk about is that the spatiality of the movement. So one was the respiration that kind of influences interaction, and the other one is the direction of the movement. This is the second part of the study with Beatrice Galvo-Merino, where we had also people coming back into the lab later and not go back into the scanner, but just outside the scanner, watch the same videos again that they saw in the original study and rate them according to different aesthetic ratings from Berlin. We then averaged across their responses for the liking, which movements, action they liked more and which they liked less. And we related this to the brain activity that they showed a year earlier when they were actually in the scanner. And what we could see is that movements that were liked more showed enhanced activity in motor as well as visual areas. So it's again a bit of both. One is the physicality and one is just the visual, more distanced. But when we looked at the videos that were liked more or less, those that were liked more have very often a vertical component in them. It's like a jump rather than just a transition from right to left, which were generally liked less. And I just found that really exciting, also considering that the movement experience, we have both that increase the kinesthetic sense of the spectator. One is the breathing that changes how we physically engage with the material. And the other one seems to be the type of the spatiality of the movement, whether it's vertical or horizontal. And because I have such an interest in kind of reaching out to do some artistic work and different kind of work and apply the findings from research, the question then is, can we use that knowledge that we have from the experiments and apply it in a practical sense? One way we tried to do so was with an interactive installation, which was shown at many different festivals and events. And the idea was we can now create movements that increase this kind of kinesthetic sense and get people to move more. And we wanted particularly to target middle-aged and older people to play with this interactive installation so that they move more and have more enjoyment when they move, etc. But what we noticed is that it was young people and children who enjoyed it. And it did not really trigger the elderly to engage much with it. So the conferences, we did some questionnaires, but also the conferences where it was mostly targeted at the older generation, that there wasn't really much interest in engaging, and it wasn't successful in that sense. I had some exciting times as well during the pandemic, because first week when the pandemic started, we got funding and had planned to do a film where we applied for the funding by saying, well, I use kind of my understanding from science to try and create a kinesthetic sense in the audience just with a 1-minute dance film. And I worked with a filmmaker and a musician to do that. But then, of course, we had to cancel it because of the pandemic, delay it again and again and again. A year later, we just did it anyway. And I would like to show you the film. The idea was high winds and slippery surfaces, so using outside forces on the body to create through that an authenticity that the audience perceives and hopefully has a stronger kinesthetic sense. Okay. And I'm just coming to the end of my presentation really here. What I wanted to include is a statement from the dance scholar and critic Anne Darley that many people in the dance world are familiar with, which is dance, although it has a visual component, is fundamentally a kinesthetic art whose perception is grounded not just in the eye, but in the entire body. And the questions to conclude are in a way still the questions I was asking myself at the beginning of the presentation, which is, when does action observation provide us with a different sense of embodiment, and why? And action observation could be replaced by watching dance or by social interaction. And the second question is, do we need to focus more on our physicalities in neuroscientific research, in action observation?
Yes.
Or in research on watching dance, or in research on social interaction? For me, those questions are also important in regards to health and well-being across the lifespan. So some studies I conducted recently with people with Parkinson's who enjoy dancing, and how they internalize the music in the dance classes and that influences them outside, but also how they enjoy observing others moving. And that's a really important element of, seems to be how it is reported to us for people with Parkinson's, that they're able to watch other people move and what that does. But also in regards to empathy and resilience training, with studies with prospective actors, psychology students, and prospective dancers, so dance students, we found that it was the actors who showed high levels of emotion recognition, so they can recognize emotions and report really above average empathic concern for others, but they don't seem to experience any distress by it. So in a way, they can dissociate more from the context. So they are not drawn as much into a distressful context or situation as other people would do. And how do they do that, and what happens there? And we were not the only one most recently who saw this or found kind of evidence of this. And I've reached my end here with the presentation. And I'm looking forward to questions and Bertha's presentation or commentary on what I said. I'm aware I talked through quite quickly, so I didn't give you much chance to interfere. Yeah, so I stop presenting here.
Okay, well, if okay with everyone, then I will just continue from Corinne's, which I think has been very enriching and very, I think, a special proposal, starting from really sensing and trying to understand the situation we are within the COVID pandemic, and going through all the research and questions and potential explanations. So my perspective, of course, comes from a different entrance, but immediately before going into my story or wherever, you made me think a lot about something that happens within dance, which is you were talking about the breathing, and you were talking about this audio experience that allows somehow, from the perspective of the audience, to maybe interact more, or in other cases in relation to the breathing, to feel certain distance to it. It triggered me because there is, immediately I went into this realization that when we are teaching dance, we are all the time talking. We are all the time transmitting the breathing, either, or if it is the counts, or just the names of the movement. Like in many martial arts, especially going back to the ancient ones, you say what you do. So there is this somehow mnemotechnics of learning movement through its sound, through its breath, through any possibility that is oral. And that happens within our own process of transmission from experts into novice, because somehow I'm not talking yet about the audience, but just what happens for us as practitioners. We are also having those layers of those who know more and those who know less, and our techniques for transmission always cope with sense of auditory material accompanying the kinesthetic, the physicality that normally we learn through mimesis or copying, etc. So this for me, I was just writing down like, yeah, well, you know, finally it is very similar to then what happens with an audience, being expert or not, knowing the practice or not, the style. It's just a matter that indeed the orality, or let's say the audio environment, depending what it is, it's also making a difference, because it's a matter of how you learn or how you like to learn. So counting is different from just if I'm doing like it's different from 1, 2, 3, 4. It's just going to provide a very different impact to the way you are absorbing the materiality. So I was just departing from there, and also it helped me somehow, I think, to frame my presentation in the sense of who is Bertha, and why am I in relation with Corinne, you know, and why the interests are similar in the sense that for me, of course, I'm a dance practitioner, and I've been very, very busy since a while already in processes of transmission and how they can be translated into other forms that is not the body. Many times I asked myself, but why do you need to do that? You know, like, I personally don't need it. And any dance practitioner doesn't really need the translation to understand what we do. We know what we do. It's always enriching understanding from other disciplines and other perspectives. What is it that they think we do? Or how do they see movement? I think it's always enriching. But I understand that there is, my fascination comes from a necessity at the beginning of validation, because dance within performing arts, it's always is the minor art, is the, you know, like the body, the female body, movement. It's always been part of a certain either profane, either sacred situations. So there is a tendency to think of it as something that accompanies higher art forms that are music or theater. So we have, let's say, there has been a fight or a little revolution within the dance sector, let's say, or discipline, to profile ourselves differently, to open up our processes. And we have accompanied the digital developments in a way that had allowed us to provide translations of what we do in a tangible way outside the body, and not only written in paper, or, you know, like, not just in articles, but just in different ways to be able to observe what dance can become or can be. So that has been for me a bit of a flag, you know, like, why am I trying to work in transdisciplinary projects? Somehow at the beginning was this necessity to provide certain validation to the field I belong, because I feel passion for it, and I think it's really enriching. But at the same time, it's also a curiosity to really understand the other perspectives. So I'm going to just share some things because after listening to Corinne, of course, different ideas come up than just the little presentation I had. So first, 1 second, because I'm just going to rearrange my space. So, okay. Now you will see, you are seeing this. So first of all, to contextualize, I am living in Biarritz, which is in a border part between France and Spain. And there is this Euro region that you are seeing here, and the little star, which is where I am. Why is this relevant? It's just to contextualize not only where I'm living, which is a beautiful place, but just to explain that the realities of performing arts are very different. And I'm in a trans-border area, which actually in the COVID behaved very differently from one side to another and had a very different impact in how performing arts were presented and allowed or not. As Corinne was talking at the beginning, suddenly people were putting many things online and everything was online. In our case, because I work with different institutions in both sides of the France and the Spanish side, the French side locked the theaters for very, very long. And actually the Spanish side didn't. It's a social and economic issue, but it didn't happen. So with the companies I was working with, we did have to find ways, indeed, as Corinne explained, to project things digitally. And what we did actually was to change formats in how we were dealing with the processes of creation. So we went into creating a screen dance instead of a laboratory in a studio. So we found ways to use digital media to still continue our processes of creativity, but we were, for example, not putting work online. We were completely against that. And in the French border, similarly happened. In other places that had, let's say, more support institutionally, then indeed it was really free online, free access, which touches another area of problematics in relation to performing arts and economic. That is not part of the subject here, but it does touch the part that why do we need all the time desperately to be there to defend ourselves in, I'm talking all the time about dance, because we don't fill up theaters. So in the case of the COVID, it happened something which was, we could, on the Spanish side, go to the theater, and then a lot of audience just find the unique place to have entertainment or just to be socially together again was the theater, was allowed, not the restaurant. In the French side, nothing was allowed, so any movement happened. But we saw an increase of audience in the Spanish side, which now with the open, let's say, of normality, that everything is open, restaurants are open, cinemas are open, everything is open, then suddenly goes back again. But that moment where we saw this potentiality, we just jumped and we created a project, like with this choreographic center I'm working, which is called Dantzaz. We developed a project for community dance and audience development. And we were really questioning if dance practice created dance audience. So somehow in align with Corinne's suggestions of what kinesthetic empathy can provide and how to apply that into the field, we were all the time questioning, does it really make a difference when we are actually practitioners? Do we want to see dance? Being able to join a project that is just about you also creating, having this community of practice, and then going to see performances, is that going to enhance your empathy towards what we think of contemporary dance, which is, let's say, harder than classic dance to provide to an audience. So that was our departure point for developing this project, which is called Agas. And it functioned very well the first 6 months. Interesting enough, from September, so from January 2021 up until June, it went really well. We had a lot of groups and a lot of communities engaging into the project, demanding more classes, demanding more situations where to see performances, etc. and then it has reduced to let's say 20% of the interactions from September up until now. Still, we're trying to understand what happened, but this is a reality. We did a lot of questionnaires in these 6 months, and the audience the practitioners responded that practicing dance, it indeed helped them to have more knowledge about dance, but also enhance their necessity to watch, and they will feel more, let's say, okay with watching something that normally they will not. That's something they answered, but we cannot continue further in the same amount of numbers of the research, let's say. But just before that, I just wanted to show or share with you my personal research path that goes from 25 to 222. And this is just a list of the different projects I engaged up until today, that indeed have been all of them transdisciplinary projects, and in where technology, especially digital media, has played a big role, especially in the first three, in the capturing intention, inside movement knowledge, and pre-choreographic elements, where especially in the first one has been a lot of the connection with Corinne, in really trying to understand different ways of indeed capturing dance, but really focusing on what is the intention of movement, and then how notation, digital media, motion tracking, and film could indeed deal with the intentionality of movement. Is this possible or not? These first three projects developed an interactive installation and other publications that somehow define a bit my line of research in this idea of translation that I mentioned before, about what happens from the embodiment, what happens from the dance knowledge when we try to place it out of the body to make it accessible to non-dancers and especially researchers. Because I fully agree with what Corinne said. Do we need to include more embodiment within our own paths that are dealing with research? I always say, yes, definitely. It doesn't matter if it's for dance or not. It's just part of the human need to know about movement. So a lot of the research has gone there in trying to translate into other ways movement. You can see in this image at the back, you see this projection of Emu Greco, of the choreographer. You see this shadow, which is the silhouette of the person in front, and some squares. It's just the possibilities of providing different image that can respond to movement. So this is one possibility that we search a lot. We also added in here sound, because as Corinne was saying, breathing is really important, and how the sonic environment surround the movement and allowed you to indeed behave in a way or in another. So sound, I think it's extremely relevant. Most of the time we connect dance with image because we think it's visual, but I think the auditory aspect is incredible relevant to understanding not only embodiment, but the empathy we feel with movement. After all this time doing this research more into the digital aspect, I shift then later more into paper, but I will explain. So these are just images because I know we want to give time for later. So I'm not going to go in depth in each of the projects. They are online and you can browse if you want. But somehow what I just wanted to put with this image is just, there is something in my research that I like, is the fact that things are tangible. So you see objects that have a behavior and have a sound, or you see images of pictures in more an archival proposal with an scenic environment, but also movement around. So there is this combination of how to keep translating the physicality into something else to always provide new physicality. That's somehow my research interest. So the orality is relevant because, as we were discussing just before, and going back into Corinne and the breathing, orality and embodiment for me are really connected. And the orality can be word, but can be just sound or the breathing. The interest in documentation, notation, it's really for me a way again as to provide a possibility of tangibility to the body that we have, and ways to deliver to others in a format that maybe sometimes is scary through movement. Then, as I said before, this image is a position that I took in relation to digital media and the possibility and potentials it has, which I think are incredible. But this is also another way. So, for example, this is just a score. This is a dance score that can be given to people with an explanation, with a physical explanation and contextualization of a situation. In this case, this was just a little improv performance that I created, but the score is in itself a document, and the score contains information that can be activated. It means that I can read this document, and if someone really explains me something before, I can go with my body and start moving in relation to what I see here. So this, for me, it's a new, let's say, it's a new device to commute with non-dancers, with disciplines that are not dealing with movement per se, as a profession, but need to enter into movement for whatever reason. And I'm also commuting with this in the sense of maybe this is a possibility to find other ways, let's say less expensive and more environmental than digital media, to provide interfaces of empathy and communication among audience and performance. So that's a bit the area where I'm dealing with, where I was talking to you of this project, Dagas, that started within the COVID and wanted really to promote contemporary dance in areas, rural areas, where actually there is no presentation whatsoever of performances, and see what could happen through the doing, so the practicing of dance, but also through the explanation of dance. And then what happens when you are going back into watching dance. So somehow I was sharing with Corinne these questions, like, does practicing dance create dance audience? Is that a reality, or is just my invention, our invention, or the assumption that if you do something, probably you will have more empathy? And do we need then to create a different kind of dance or different kind of approach to a society that somehow is escaping the theater or has never entered the theater? And in this post-COVID situation, we are not certain that are coming back. And so is only a 2D screen projecting video a solution? I am not sure about that. I really, really doubt it. So somehow that was that part of my presentation. I just wanted to share maybe some websites just to provide with somehow entrances to a little hint, and then I think it's just nice to then give you the space. So, for example, this is a project that it's a bit in sync with what Corinne was showing about the laterality and horizontality that we work with Chris Ziegler, where we developed this kind of a space where an audience will lay down and put these sensors and glasses on and just watch a film. And this film and the telephones and the chair was also vibrating, related to the moments of the film where arms were moving, then your arms will vibrate, or this kind of correlations of movement and sensing in the body to provide this, again, this empathy or this area of understanding. This is just an image of the project I was mentioning to you, Dagas, where just normal people that never danced were in environments finding ways to be creative and find ways to create with others within the pandemic situation. And then just to finalize, two more projects like this pre-choreographic movement kit, which is a very different translation. This is dealing with choreographic ideas of, in that moment, Ennio Greco, that we translated into objects that had sound connected to each object. And each object had a little score of action that a participant should do. Move the object and you will hear the sound, and you will read somehow what is the principle that Ennio Greco is investigating, but we do it in this ludic way, somehow to let's say, put closer the approach into what the complexity of choreography can be into something that is just something you do every day. And if you want to dig more into these kind of projects, I just put here the website of Inside Movement Knowledge, where is a rich amount of publications and content on this kind of research that are transdisciplinary and that engage different areas of work, but also the body as dance as mean of communication and exchange. So I think I stopped sharing, and for me, this, I think, will be the time to open up if the discussion and see.
Thank you, Bertha. Also, as a response to what you were presenting, what reminds me again of where we always had discussions and kind of relate to each other's work is the interest in translating dance to something else. My interest in choreography was always kind of, how can I, what I have in my mind as movements, bring into the mind of an audience through the performance, this kind of translational aspect. And it was really interesting at the end when you were talking about the objects, because that was one part of your work I always struggled more with to understand. But this idea of you translate it to something into everyday, I think is really interesting also in relation to the work I did with the people with Parkinson's. Because it's actually not easy at all, but very helpful for them when they can translate what they learn in the dance classes to their everyday life. So one participant, for example, was explaining when they had problems, I think, with their spoon or a biscuit or something, and they couldn't grasp it and it didn't work. Then they were thinking of, well, but hold on, we do this in our dance classes. How about if I just use it now in everyday life? And then he was really astonished by how he suddenly was able not just to initiate the movement, but seemingly to control it by making kind of this translation from the movements in class to everyday life.
Yes, and somehow here is the other way around. It's like from the complexity of choreography, of writing with movement, of developing certain constructions, how do you take, what do you take to indeed, I know it's a reduction, we are reducing, but in that reduction, it's clear that there is a necessity to alphabetize movement into our societies, because we don't have it. It's just nowhere. We don't know how to read movement, but any movement. So then what do? Well, we need to reduce, we need to go to simple parameters and things that are playful and communal, just to allow people to lose fear. To lose fear towards this idea that dance is only dance in the sense of professional dance is really something that is far from you, and that it's to be watched somewhere specific. And it, you know, like there are a lot of conditions that we establish with the apparatus of theater, but we are suffering from that apparatus because nobody's coming. You know. So no one's coming. Why they're not coming? Well, there may be a lot of reasons, but definitely the distance we have created between the professionalism and society, it's too broad, and definitely we need to come closer. Not, I just don't mean like, well, the only way to do it is doing objects. No, it's not that. But it is useful to find different ways of objectifying somehow the richness or the possibilities within the creativity of dance. So somehow that's for me like, yeah, it's the other way around. It's like from that specificity going back to daily life, you know, like, or just using a phone, you know, like you have no fear in moving your phone, but you may have fear in, if I tell you, you know, move your hand here or move your hand there, then you're going to be like, oh, no, I freeze. But you move your phone, you are moving something else, you are okay with it. You know, like that perspective is quite interesting.
Yeah, that's a very good point, actually. And I really like your final question, do we need to create a different kind of dance? Which I then use dance translated as, do we need to have a different kind of dance in how we interact socially?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. Definitely. Yes. That's why for me, when you were questioning the role of embodiment, for me in general, not just in an academic world or in research in general, what is the role of embodiment within our society? And then what can dance do for that? Because as I said, we know the professional, we know what it is, and it may be necessary, maybe, you know, I don't know. If performing arts can have different stratus of touching society, not to say that everything needs to be social art, but yeah, where to find a balance and what is our position somehow. But yeah, I find very enriching the discoveries that are dealing with empathy, because it does indeed, I mean, kinesthetic empathy for the practitioner is essential. It's really essential.
And I've been suffering recently, just staring into a screen the whole day.
I think we all.
Much movement happening. But I think a few people have to leave early, so I don't want to kind of stop the question time, like open to everybody else.
Okay, yeah. Thank you very much, Corinne. Thank you, Bertha, for your amazing presentation. You gave us a lot of elements to think about, starting from the audio environment and the breathe part. I think it's something that in this particular moment is important to think about. I think because of COVID, because of the use of mask, how this new way of live could impact on this aspect, and also the role of digital media, of course, how to use them to enhance or to translate
Yes.
a knowledge which is not shared with all the people that are looking at the screen. I think there are a lot of things of very interesting. I don't know if there is any question. Otherwise, I will go first. Don't be shy.
Please. It's always hard.
Okay. Renata Gambino, Raffaella, could you activate the microphone? Thank you. Okay. Okay.
Oh, no. Hello, good evening. And I think I can also show myself. Yes. Okay. Good evening. Yeah, I was wondering, thank you very much, both of you, for the wonderful and very inspiring lecture. I was wondering, I remember that as a child, I was used to go to a village in Sicily where I live, and all the people were used to dance on days where they have to something to cheer about. And this kind of dance was not professional in any case, but what struck me is that the dancing people were not trying to make it perfect, but to get attuned,
Yes.
to get attuned
Yes.
between each other.
Mm-hmm.
So I think one of the interesting parts of embodiment and dance is about resonating, and you
Yes.
did it very well with breathing, uh, but breathing is a part of this resonating. People
Mm-hmm.
dance when they try to be attuned with others.
Mm-hmm.
So it is the basic place where dance begins, I think. But I'm not an expert about this. So do you think that this resonating and trying to attune is an important part to be studied? And why is modern dancing not so much focused on this attunement among dancing people?
Yes.
Thank you.
I think it's, thank you for the question. I don't know if Corinne, if you also want to answer, but I think the following. There are proposals, of course, in contemporary dance that are looking at that, definitely. This tuning, this community feeling, it's really one of the main things that dance carries with. But also, let's say, there is a lot of reaction to what has been established. I don't know, probably it's just human tendency, right? Like we react to what happened. Like I react to my mom and my mom reacted to her mom, right? So when we are creating, we react to things that have been created before. And dance history is very long, but there is a moment where we cut from the people. There is a moment where it becomes elitaire. There is a moment where it becomes something that it is not about tuning, but it is really about a specific aesthetic that represents certain parts of our societies and not others. So we enter into politics, and what happens in there is that the necessities are different. And then, as I'm saying, like if I'm going to be reacting as an artist to what happened in the previous century, I'm no longer dealing with society, because that is not what has been part of the writing to create dance. I don't know if I'm being clear, but contemporary dance somehow reacted to ballet, yes, and didn't, or let's say lately it's starting to connect more to the, not let's say origin, but to the possibility of dance as something that is more communal, but it's really not general. And we have to see that the professionalism is part of a market. It's part of a system that depends on selling a specific aesthetics to an audience that is going to buy it. I mean, we are enterprises. It may sound very weird, but it's performing arts, yes, but our enterprises relating to specific circuits where theaters want to project a specific programs to an audience. So in there, we go into a very big spectrum of possibilities and proposals that somehow not always are dealing with the tuning. No, they are not. They are dealing with something else. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting of thinking about it. It crosses a certain threshold and becomes something else. I was not thinking in those terms, but it's in a way similar. So in one way, yes, I agree. Attunement is like one of the basic principles when we interact with each other, whether that is dancing or not, but can be observed a lot in community dancing or in dancing for health and well-being, like medical dancing, improvisation, that people not just attune with each other, but also feed ideas from each other within a short moment, what, like Bertha said, also has happened over histories. There I also find that what happens is it's almost like individuals moving together want to find a new language. And there is evidence that kind of the way we observe dance and see dance or deal with dance is also linked to how we process language. But I think that's a different level to more of the visceral, respirational level that I was talking about. But it's not that it's one or the other. I think they are both present. But of course, when I do the research, I focus on one element and try and design a study that uses that particular element.
There is a question from Vittorio, please.
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for your presentations. Really, both give us a lot of food for thought. First, a comment. When we compare the response of beholders, bystanders, to something happening live in front of them with the film version of it, it's interesting to note that people try to look whether, for example, in macaques, mirror neurons respond similarly to an action being performed by a bodily agent in front of the macaque with respect to when the macaque was just watching a filmed version of the same action. But an experiment done by our colleagues in Tübingen University a few years ago. And what they found is that the vast majority of the neurons responded to both. Half more intensely to the real action, but the remaining half responded with the same level of firing, with the same intensity of discharge to both. And we are talking about a species which is 25 million years before the invention of language, so to speak, which means that at the very least for us primates, these mechanisms are already capable to generalize what happens in the physical world to some form of representational mapping of it. Then a very interesting point was raised by Renata Gambino about the use of social dancing events where people probably feel more member of a community as long as they perform together, they move together, they breathe together, they attune their body to the body of others. And probably this is so to speak, a very late témoignage, I'm missing the English word, testimony of probably the origin of dance, which I think probably something we invented to boost the social cohesion and the like. But on the other hand, modern dance, like all forms of creative expression that historically we learn to designate as art, do something more, or definitely something different. For example, if I sit in the audience and watch some contemporary ballet, similarly to when I behold a painting or another piece of art, I think that choreography, if we stay focused on dance, make me explore ways of using the body to express something which are not part of my motor repertoire. They make me see something different. So in a way, this more passive attitude, I'm sitting in the audience, which is never totally passive because, as you, Corinne, beautifully showed, we know what's going on in the brain, we mimic, we simulate, there's a lot going on. It's not just the passive recording of what is happening in front of us. There is an active participation. But, I mean, I want to be guided by the performer, and the performer, through the performance, is leading me to something I would never accomplish, I would never see, I would never think of alone without attending to the performance. So I think that the history of the evolution of dance brings something new that probably was not present when dance was a social ritual practice. I tend to see art as nothing as not as something that is detached from reality, but as in a way, if you allow me, it's a bit paradoxical, and a form of augmented reality, which means it enriches my grasp on reality. Reality is bigger than what I normally experience in my more prosaic transaction with the physical world. So I think these two aspects have to be considered. I don't know what you make of that. Thank you.
Well, it's not something that I included much in my presentation, this consideration, which is true. Thinking back, why I haven't is probably because my focus was, or is very often when I study human behavior and responses to dance practice to better understand the condition of cognitive and perceptual and sensory processing, that I want to use artistic stimuli because I think they create in a way a stronger response and allow better to control for different individual conditions or levels of expertise. But that's certainly something I think would be good for me to consider thinking back about what I was presenting. The other thing about the study that you mentioned with the macaques, where half of the mirror neurons were responding stronger to the live context. There is also research on children watching TV or children watching a live actor. And again, there's a stronger engagement with the live action. And what I find interesting as well in the mirror neuron network, which I haven't touched upon very much today, is that at the beginning there were certain areas that you identified as well with the Italian group amongst Rizzolotti. But then more and more research has been done, and much more and more different areas of the human neural network were identified to be possibly specific for certain aspects of the action observation.
Right.
Which I find really interesting to look at more of the language type processing of action observation in Broca's area or inferior frontal, but also more the embodied response in those
touch and emotions.
Yes. And I think that's something that's really interesting also to look at. It's not, and even if you go and watch an artistic piece of work, it's not just one way, the way you perceive the work. You bring your own history and knowledge and repertoire with you, kind of embedded in there.
Indeed, mirroring probably was not exactly, I mean, it's a metaphor. Where we are not mirrors. We bring along our own idiosyncratic personality life history. So each of us, in a way, mirrors differently. There's a huge inter-individual variability. Yeah, right.
But then if I use what you both are saying, because there is a certain problematic in the sense of where is it positioned. I'm talking about contemporary dance. Where is it positioned? It is not a ritual anymore. No, it's not. Even though it is processual, it is something that if me as a performer, I am transformed when I do it, and you may be, but in a different way.
Yes.
But what happens, let's say probably this problematic comes from what you both of you were just mentioning. Indeed, it's our metaphors, it's our previous embodiment, it's our prior knowledge that we bring into the theater. We sit down and we watch. If there is no prior knowledge at all connected to what we are watching, probably we don't come back again. If there is no connection in the dramaturgy of it, nothing is readable for you because you want to make meaning out of it. And we are not about meaning unless you go to dance theater or a narrative dance performance. Then we have a gap. We have a gap of understanding, like with contemporary music. If you are not, then it's like I'm very sorry, but I just don't get it. It just sounds like ding, ding. Or with contemporary art, visual arts. If there is something in there that can passionate you, as what you say, it's art and it may enlighten me, or it's art and I'm feeling very ignorant and I know nothing. So in the case of contemporary dance, because as I said before, we are the minor of the minor and the lower in the scale of market. Yes.
Is that right? Because I mean, there are circuits. I mean, if you go to Southern as well in London, you don't expect to see the Swan Lake. You would specifically. There is an audience who is trained, who loves
exactly.
contemporary dance.
But let's say there are points. If we take Europe, you have points where indeed, let's say the alphabetization or the embeddedness of dance in all of it, the spectrum, not just the classic, but a non-neoclassic, but the whole spectrum of it is spread within society as something that is common to consume. It is not everywhere. No, Spain, it's really a no-go. It's really like we are in baby steps.
Really?
France, yes. If it's not Madrid or Barcelona, there is no audience. No, it's not that there is no audience. Sorry, there is no programmation.
Okay.
Probably you may have audience, but you need to program, right? If you don't program it, there is no audience. And it depends. This is very, I mean, like it's very specific, and how a country promotes culture, how it is promoted, how it is in education or not. Yes, because if we don't construct communal metaphors and communal perspectives to diversify way of looking at the world, it's very difficult. Yeah, if when I was a child, we learned a flute. That's what we knew about music. Yeah, and that's it. So poo, 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 poo. And then are you going to go to a contemporary music concert? Well, there is a huge path to go. If you have nothing about movement, but just sports, and that's your only reading of it. If the only idea of choreography is a match, a football match, for example, because we hear that, oh yeah, that's a choreography of, yeah, then of course I'm gonna sit in a place and watch this thing. There is no connection.
Yeah.
So in art, if we don't nurture
exactly
society, then we have a problem, because these connections that you are describing cannot really happen, or happen in weird ways or in, I don't know. Yes. And so indeed we want to tune, we want to commute together, and when it doesn't happen, or we have no tools to relate to the dramaturgies we are seeing, then we don't make sense of structures. Yeah.
In a way, one possibility, I see something growing in the field of social well-being.
Yes, definitely.
For example, there are projects. There is one project, a pilot project that I know about. Dance art is, and where some informatic engineers, choreographers, and MDs specialized in geriatrics.
Yes.
Put together this project where the choreographer teaches elderly people to mimic postures presented in Renaissance painting, and the engineer provide an online feedback that tells participants how good they are performing in order to reach. And this is something that reportedly should be advantageous to challenge elderly people fragility, to give them more autonomy. So it's there are attempts to use art for purposes that go beyond the mere entertainment or cultural, and much depends on our governments.
Exactly.
They want to put on that, of course.
Yes, yes.
Okay, I don't want to monopolize the discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Vittorio. What is interesting in the project that you mentioned, if I understood correctly, is that people enjoy it, but it uses a level of you doing it correct or not so correct. And my aim is always, when we talk about dance for health and well-being, to use it, or dance for community, to use it not as how well do you perform, but to enhance the embodied experience and the accessibility of those sensations to the individual, which is really what then I would argue enhances well-being.
I fully agree.
Yes. But it's so much easier to see, yes, I did, like you, it was part of the installation as well, and it was fun. It's like, how much can I expand? Am I at the limits or not? Rather than how does it feel if I do it like this way or this way? It's much more vague and subtle and less accessible.
Yeah, but I think that's also, for me, it's also a passionate research in regards to digital media, or especially motion tracking, which is defined by quantitative parameters, things that we can measure. Yeah, and it can only be designed from there. And they are doing a lot of research in how to get qualitative ideas and how to then embed that. And that's why I always enjoy these transdisciplinary projects. But indeed, yeah, how do you provide a response that is not connected to a prescribed yes, no, well, wrong, but more to a sensorial? And that's why I keep saying audio is relevant here. Yeah, not so much the image, but the audio.
Yeah, and I was just thinking what I didn't say with our audiovisual installation that I did with a gaming staff member. It didn't work quite so well, and I think one of the reasons was because we didn't integrate the audio well enough. Yeah, so there was not good audio feedback.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think, I mean, I don't know how it is cognitively, but it seems that when you have what happens here, we're watching, so we're watching all the time. Yes. And it's like image is really above everything. But when we take most of interactive installations dealing with dance are using image. And when we took the image away and we just provided sound, as means of sound, as means of feedback. Yes, so it's not yes, right, wrong, out of your execution of a form. Yes, because that's also something that is interesting when you're talking about the breathing. The breathing comes from in, and it does guide the physicality differently than if you approach the physicality just by the form and has no content or has no specific intention. It's very different. So when we have the audio, it provides you an atmosphere, and that atmosphere can already tune your intention into the form and not just executing a form. I don't know if I'm going too far or whatever, but it's I think it's a very interesting space, because for me that connects to the idea of tuning, or the idea of ritual, in the sense of connecting one another. If the intentions are clear, why do we move? Then we can share that. In that understanding, then we go into the sensing and the feeling of that. And I don't need to be watching you if you did it correctly or not. It's just I am feeling that because the intention is clear. And I can embody it and then replicate it. Yeah.
We are back at the start of our first discussions. Do you realize?
Yes, we are there, Corinne.
Like 10, 12 years ago.
Exactly.
Other question? Okay, I think, yeah, let me just say about what you're talking now. Sometimes I think we forgot how it is a multisensory experience. No, it seems that the visual part of it, of the experience is the most important one, while we have the auditory stimuli coming, and also I see from your slide, Bertha, the tactile somatosensory, with the chair. You use also the I don't know what it was, vibration stimuli. Yeah, and I think this is important, something that has to be stressed while talking about performing arts and dance. Yeah. So thank you. And yeah. Okay, I see a comment in the chat. No, okay, it's not a question. Oh no, yeah. Ecco, yes. Bertha, please.
It's me. I just want to thank you, and I see very important to make your acquaintance, to get to know you. I see the perspective you are talking about, and I refer especially to the projects that Bermudez, Bertha told us. There is really, I think, dance, contemporary dance is pioneer nowadays. All over Europe, there is this new perspective that many of you professional dancers in contemporary dances move towards this horizon, like a big significance for everybody to making us again share the moving. I see in Italy, in projects for well-being, in many projects. It goes beyond what is called community dance. It goes beyond that, no, Bertha? Yes. And it's very important. So I think that in this direction that have to do with empathy, with the possibility of going beyond professional and not professional. Dance into the performing arts is pioneer. Is more in the forefront than theater or other performing arts. Dance is pioneer, really. It's a very hopeful. Yes, it's a hopeful, it's a positive direction. I know many Italian. Also, we had with us Virgilio Sieni some days ago. He also, part of his work is moves in this direction. And many. I see that you all put a lot of meanings in that.
Yes, I think there, I mean,
you find like a connection important for our society. I am interested in this also anthropological dimension.
Definitely. I think since the 90s up until now, there is a whole trajectory in developing, so somehow in opening our own processes, because they were very hidden.
Yeah.
While I don't know, this is my speculation, but many times we thought that because theater has a text and music has a libretto or a score, an opera as well, that's why they were high arts, right? Because they had something tangible, and the architectonic around the amount of people being able to execute and to do things out of one single partiture is like, oh wow. And we weren't, yeah, we were not belonging to that. But it's not true. I mean, it's not true, and it is in our practice. Yes, it's immediate. We create in the studio, but we do also have tangible things that we use, or we also have tangible means of these translations that allowed, if you want to have these documents. So somehow what happened with the digital shift, with the advance in technology, is that it allowed dance artists to find their own ways to position their practice, that it was not just in a paper.
Yes.
Because we are multimodal, or dance, I mean, humans are multimodal. Yes. So dance is extremely multimodal. We are in space, we're in time, we're everywhere. So then why to reduce it just to writing? It didn't feel correct. Yeah. So suddenly to have this convergence of a space with digital, where you can have everything, the words and the image, and everything could be there in a DVD-ROM, in a website, that allows certain emancipation, yes, but also certain allowance to open up processes that were always hidden. We were very secret, yeah. So this idea of opening towards the other has allowed the possibility to connect with many different disciplines and create transdisciplinary projects that indeed are very they are innovative, and they are inventing as well potential futures into how to think about the body and how to think about movement, and then that can be open to many areas, many fields, let's say. So I make this connection between the digital development and dance digitization as a possibility or a potential for our art form to somehow, as you say, innovate further than theater, because they have the text. So then what else? They already have translated.
I see.
Yeah, but it's not true, because theater has more than just the text. It's not just words.
No.
But then we didn't give the importance to the rest. So then, but since we didn't have that, supposedly we didn't have that thing that was already marking who we were, we have the free space to reinvent it. But theater and music are somehow standardized in one single way of translation, which is the text and the partiture. So that's my hypothesis. Yes.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, so I think it's time to say goodbye and to thank you both. Thank you very much for your presentation, for your time. It has been an amazing conversation too with us. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, thank you.